Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Randy Bach. Today, September 22nd, 2021. And I am going to be giving yet another coronavirus conversation. This is, I don't know, maybe my 40-somethingth. It seems like a lot more. It shouldn't be that many. We should have been done with all this a long time ago. The virus is just going to go virusing. It's really humans that have somewhat lagged behind. I'm actually writing a couple of books, and I hope you show some interest in them, and maybe let me know if you want to see any advanced copies, galleys, and so forth. I'm writing kind of a debunking of the Zika phenomenon, the last pandemic. This, of course, would make me a pandemic expert because I will have had two under my belt while everyone's only working on one. COVID's actually quite a lot. There's not that much, frankly, to the virus itself. It's a tiny little thing, tiny little bug. We've had it around forever and a half. As long as humans have been around, there have been coronaviruses, and they probably infect other animals as well. As we know, pangolins and bats and maybe some other animals. Who knows, maybe dogs and cats. It's hard to say. But there's not that much there to be had with the actual virus itself. It's a tiny little kind of soccer ball thing with spikes on it. And it communicates easily through the respiratory system, as coronaviruses have for a long time, based on their tiny, tiny size. There's not that much really different about it. It acts like a common cold, but this one was a little bit super packed because possibly the so-called gain of function, which we're not allowed to talk about. Somebody says here, stop pushing the vaccine. It is taken without risk. Maybe I'll have a chance to answer some questions as time goes on. I think the vaccine's a reasonable thing for elderly and sick. I'm not pushing it per se. I'm not an anti-vax thing, which I think is an absurd comment anyway. And I've mentioned this before, the vaccine has a role. I don't think it has a role for young people. Herd immunity is a better thing. There's no reason to futz around, play around with the system that actually works so well for the young. I'm going to maybe show you some mild demonstrations and slides and examples as the half hour, 45 minutes, an hour progress. The thing I kind of wanted to mention was a quote by Albert Einstein, and I'm covering it again, as I said, because I'm writing a book on debunking Zika, which, if you remember, as far back as 2015, 2016, was the last great pandemic. It was the biggest pandemic probably in my lifetime to that point, and maybe yours as well if you're more than 5 or 6 years old. And it was mosquito-borne in Brazil and caused microcephaly, supposedly. I think there's a lot of, false narratives to be had therein, although people haven't backed down from it. It's been very instructive for me to study that pandemic because I think there are some lessons to be had for this one. And what are those? Well, people don't necessarily back down from their perceived conclusions, and people kind of keep with their own narratives, and they don't necessarily listen to rhyme or reason over time. Zika hasn't really done very much in the intervening years, and we don't really hear about it, but money's still funding Zika research, and the people who came up with the theory originally causing microcephaly haven't backed down from that. We were supposed to see 1 million microcephalic births per year in the tropics. Year by year since then, that would be 5 million. And God knows there are probably hundreds of thousands of births that were postponed or prevented or aborted in fear of Zika. And yeah, well, it turns out it wasn't that big a deal. I think we run the risk and danger of assuming something is a bigger deal than it is because our kind of fear receptors are bigger than our acknowledgement or relaxation receptors, the part of our brain. I think that's a very, animal thing. We are incredible animals. We still, although are animals, we still are working on the operating system we had, thousands of years ago, potentially hundreds of thousands of years ago. And we have a lot more modern stuff around us, a lot more things to comprehend, but can we? And I'm maybe going to touch on an interesting paper I saw along the way this week. It came upon me randomly, again, working on this book on Zika. But the quote I was going to get to was one by Albert Einstein, which I inserted into the book at the appropriate moment, which is that he was asked, how can we understand, particle physics, nuclear physics, the atomic bomb, and so forth, and not understand how to stop, war? and so forth, and how to get people safe from the same atomic bomb. And Einstein said, well, because I don't really have an answer, but it's a fact that politics is more complicated than physics, and the physics he was doing is very, very complicated. And I think what he means is that it doesn't necessarily have right or wrong answers. I mean, there are certain scientific aspects that get cleaner and cleaner as you go from mathematics, well, in the realm of physics and mathematics, where they're kind of binary answers, yes or no. This thing is true or isn't true. Gravity works in a certain direction. Particles will do the same thing over and over again. But as you get more complicated, even into chemistry, there are more interactions. And from chemistry, there's microbiology. From microbiology, there's say medicine, and from medicine there's public health, and from public health there's politics. And as you work up the food chain in a way, or at least some ladder of organization, you get actually slightly more disorganized over time, and it becomes harder and harder to come up with concrete answers and or to find those in an actionable way. This kind of swing in the new, current administration from changing from Trump to Biden. Biden said he would listen to the experts. The experts are the scientists. The scientists would do science. And science is a cut and dry thing. And again, it is potentially for astronomy. It is potentially for particle physics. And it is, with very large, observable, things such as momentum and gravity and whatnot. But it's not quite so easy as you get into complex systems. Let's see. So I'm going to just read this question here. Consider that Aussies are drawing loaded weapons on each other because of the flu. Yeah, I'm actually going to get to that in a little bit, and worse. It's not just the Aussies. It's the police force, and sacrificing so much of what we got along the way, what we've been able to build up through society and societies, and kind of sacrifice it on the altar of a kind of a misapprehension of, we'll call it a bad flu without vaccine. We don't really know how bad our influenzas are year to year. Last year we didn't really seem to have one, maybe because it was folded into this one, or people got flu shots, so they were more careful, whatever. But there were times that people had the flu and they got very, very sick for it. Before the 1950s, when the influenza vaccinations came into being, people got sicker. And even since then, there have been some bad flu years. But the kind of the granddaddy is the 1918 Spanish flu, and there were some other ones before that. One of them might actually have been a coronavirus. I think it was called the Russian flu from 1904 or 8 or something like that. But it's been a long while since the influenza has been that bad because we have vaccines. But the vaccines, again, I think they work. They've tempered and tamped down the virulence of influenza year by year, but those have been given beforehand. When you give a vaccine during an epidemic, you will see some drift, and that's something we've talked about before. You're seeing the various strains. I think it's not a huge deal. I've have separate episodes, mind you. If people are interested in what I've said about Zika, I have a separate episode done last week on this, page regarding my work on, kind of the Zika pandemic, and I have a separate one on Delta variant. So I recommend you look for those on my either the YouTube or the viral conversation page on Facebook. But we're going to cover a lot of those things. So without further ado, maybe I will just turn on the meme machine. I've been collecting some memes over the course of the week, and I'd like to share those with you. The kind of there's no necessarily real order to these. I think I've maybe organized them somewhat by theme. This is a problem I'm having when I have the dictation on. I apologize. Let me just get out. I erred. So let me see if I can come back to the beginning of this. The dictate, when I have Dragon on, which I use separately, it hears me say things and it does commands because it's just like too good a little robot for me. So I apologize. So let's add this to the stream. So this kid here, I think his name is Mason, and he's, I think maybe in daycare or something like that. His helpful daycare worker keeps putting the mask on. You can see the video. I think it's, making its rounds on Twitter and whatnot. And this kid, keeps taking his mask off still. And I don't know what she does at the end. I haven't actually watched the video, but I've seen about it. I've heard about it, and I've seen this meme here. So at top is the Emmys. I think it was in San Francisco. I might be wrong. It was Los Angeles. I take that back. It was in Los Angeles. The San Francisco had some other award dinner where the mayor, humorously, London Breed, her name is. I think she's in her 40s, and she interned under Willie Brown. I hope not literally, as potentially our next president did. But she was London Breed. Mayor London Breed was videoed at a party, and she was dancing away without a mask, similar to the Obama party in Martha's Vineyard last month or so for his 60th birthday, and without masks and so forth. And confronted, she has all kinds of mask restrictions in San Francisco, some of the most draconian anywhere. And she said, well, I was feeling the spirit, like, don't get on my case. I had a drink or two in me. I heard music. I had to go dance. So if you have the spirit in you, I mean, I applaud her for her candor in this one, and I guess her brazen attitude. But it's a craziness that the elites can do what they want, which is what you should be doing. You're elite. You are elite. If you're watching this podcast, you're elite. You're a smart person. You deserve better. Mason over here, he's a potential smart person, probably a future leader and so forth. He doesn't want to deal with this thing. This is very uncomfortable. He shouldn't have to deal with this. So why, probably he can get an Emmy because he's, probably getting more views than a lot of people up here are on a regular basis just from his single presentation so far. So maybe he, by virtue of being invited to next year's Emmys, will be able to take off his mask. And again, this is the meme show. So I will, whoops. So let's see here. Apparently, COVID is the first virus in human history that doesn't spread at award shows, ruling class galas, and obnoxious birthday gatherings on Martha's Vineyard. Yep. Here's another one, very similar theme. Schoolboy, this is a joke, obviously. Schoolboy who hasn't seen a human face in weeks, just glad celebrities had a good time last night. And I think that was probably the Emmys. This is a similar concept here. I think we've been saved somewhat by sports. They've been a great example. I think, again, the Knicks making the playoffs last spring opened New York City up to a greater degree than anything else did on the political scene. There was so much pent-up demand to see the Knicks play in the playoffs. Had been, 7 or 8 years, and they had possibilities, and people demanded to be there, and they were. And after that, it was hard to stop the floodgates. There were no, I guess, surges of cases after any of these football games, after the U.S. Open, after the Knicks playoffs, after the Milwaukee playoffs, and Los Angeles was the same thing. They opened up after the football. I don't know. Maybe we should just have football games in elementary schools from here on in, so that kids can share in the joy. It's an ongoing problem. Same issue here. It's not just the United States. This is London. Sadiq Khan is the mayor, and he's having a grand old time, but you can't. He has rules about public transport. You got to wear a mask. I see people on the Boston College campus buses going from place to place. They look so sad. They're all kind of staring at their toes, wearing masks. And, they're young people. They don't need this. This is a bifurcated illness. If this is a bad illness, a bad flu, it's that for older people, obese people, people with comorbidities, or any or all of the above. Not for young kids, not for the people who go to concerts, not for people who go to football games, etc. This is just a random thing I happened to see leaving CVS today. I didn't wear a mask. We have a mandate, but I didn't have a mandate myself. On the way out, I saw this MCAS. That's the Massachusetts, I don't know what it stands for, but it basically achievement tests for kids, elementary school and so forth. Guess what? Scores plunge in pandemic. Statewide results mirror national test trends. Well, I guess everyone's kind of gotten a little stupider, not just in the way they're handling COVID, but in the way they're handling the aftermath of COVID. And they're going to get stupider still because the iterative effect, because they're getting stupider not going to school. Of course, maybe they're going to get smarter not going to school. Who knows? But they're certainly not doing better on the technical tests. Everyone worries about equity and inequities and inequalities and so forth between various ethnic groups, inner city, etc. Those people who have fewer computers at home and less educated parents are going to do even more poorly and have done so in the course of this pandemic. This is of course, who would be most in favor of this? Close, lockdown, so forth, the Boston Globe, which tends to go left of center. The other article here is immigrants' hopes turn to frustration. So the Haitian immigrants are frustrated, I guess. Well, I think you might have a right to be frustrated as well. I mean, I don't know who invited them. I don't know what rights they have to be here per se. I would imagine with Haiti's vaccine rate at 1%, that everybody in this picture is not vaccinated. Who knows if they have COVID and so forth, but somehow you're supposed to be masked and kept away from all of your rights in institutions and activities, schools and so forth. But more people can come in without vaccination. So which brings up this point. Why is Dr. Fauci silent on the COVID risk from opening the border? You can ask your congressman that. I recommend you do so. I don't know if Dr. Fauci will answer letters. He's actually pretty candid in his own private letters, and multiple times discussed the absurdity of masks, and certainly he has flopped and flipped along the way. Getting a little bit to, I guess this one kind of slipped in here. I have not corroborated this, but I don't doubt it. Instagram getting rid of the natural immunity hashtag, so you can't necessarily talk about it or gather conversation about it. Natural immunity is, dozens of times, maybe up to 30 times stronger, better immunity than a vaccine immunity. And why is that? Well, because the vaccine is just one protein out of many. Again, I've mentioned this a number of times, but if you lived with somebody, even a week, you're going to have a better recognition of that person than having seen him or just one piece of him or his clothing or his eyeglass or something like that. I have to identify him later. A vaccine is a very limited approach. If you don't want to get the thing, if it's smallpox, I get it. You would do anything rather than get smallpox. Coronavirus, for almost everybody walking and talking, running around today, is not a big deal. That includes two groups: the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. The unvaccinated skew towards the young, and certainly essentially all our children and whatnot. They don't get sick from this. This is not an issue for them. They will do better with natural immunity. They should get natural immunity. There's no reason not to. Chickenpox parties, rubella parties happened during my childhood in the ancient days, and there's no reason you can't have coronavirus parties now. And people are doing them regardless of whether you think they should, by virtue of just partying. Young people, 20-somethings, are out dancing and partying. They are pretty much the backbone of the Delta surge. But for the most part, absent any associated surge in hospitalizations. I'm going to get to a little bit of data here. This, unfortunately, I'm borrowing this from somebody else, and I don't have the full corroboration for websites. I'll try to get this at some point. The one in the lower left is from Brazil, though. It's the vaccinated versus unvaccinated raw mortality over time. And you can see the dates at bottom. Here, this is February 2001, and Brazil kind of came late to the party, as it were, and for a long time, the unvaccinated had higher mortality, raw mortality data. This is not by cause, but this is just the deaths in the country, and they segregated by vaccinated and unvaccinated. The vaccinated numbers were pretty low. That being said, there were higher numbers for the unvaccinated. Well, since the last couple of months, what has happened is that the vaccinated have a higher, overall mortality than the unvaccinated. I think there's a reasonable explanation for this. I think that the vaccinated skew older and the unvaccinated younger. But the point here is that the unvaccinated, let's call them the young, are not dying. They're not at danger. The vaccinated were at danger early on, and because in the unvaccinated group, this it's kind of a mystery here. This is higher because this was old people. As the old people turned into this category, their numbers went down, but so too did the gross number of unvaccinated, because you've removed the sick people. Once you remove the sick people, you're just left with the people who weren't dying in the first place, which are the young people. So why should you be caring about them? I don't know, because they do just fine without your vaccine. And then frankly, they're going to be a better insurance against future coronavirus with full natural herd immunity. Ask Sweden. They're not having any bumps from the Delta at all. This is another one here. I'm not going to get really into this one, but there has been some persistent excess COVID mortality in the vaccinated. This, again, probably has to do with older age people amongst the vaccinated. So it's probably just the fact that older and sicker people die more often. That shouldn't be a shock. So what next? So again, I'm kind of skimming around here. These are just some slides that I picked out that interested me. From England, this shows some waning potentially in the vaccine strength over time, where there's efficacy against death. That's a hard thing to say. Try it. And across all the this is in England, so they're using 3 different vaccines, but the decline is more in the elderly, and I frankly think that the deaths have to do with the fact that sick people die. So you can see that there's a bigger decline in the so-called clinically extremely vulnerable. This is efficacy against hospital admission, and so the numbers are going down over time. But in the meanwhile, people have gotten older. So as time goes on, people get sicker and they get older. And if you're over 65, if you're 80-year-olds in here, they're 80-year-old. Now you're 80 and a half. So I'm not sure this is all vaccine related. I'm going to get to a point. This is from a video by a guy named Del Bigtree. Easy to remember name, D-E-L, and then Bigtree is one word. And he's got a bunch of videos, and this is actually from a few months ago. But I thought he made a really nice explanation. I'm not going to do his whole video. I can share the link with you later. This is basically what you have as a kid. You have non-specific antibodies, and your immune system is really good. You don't have as much of a library as an old person. You haven't seen as many diseases, but your front line of defense. This is kind of a random defense. And if you don't know, football, X's and O's, this is what he's referring to. This is your defense, and this is the offense. It's got a bunch of different players. So it's, in a sense, this is the virus and all the basically different antigens on the virus. And so if X is the running back and he's going to do a play, these guys can pretty much block anybody. They are non-specific antibodies. I hope this is clear. So the play dies right here. It doesn't really get very far. And even if you try to give the ball to Y or one of the wide receivers or something like that, A or L, they're going to have trouble because these guys can attack anybody. This is your non-specific immune system, kind of your surface immunity and so forth. This is why kids are not getting sick. They have a really excellent non-specific antibody system. And frankly, everybody under 50 healthy does as well. Now, this wanes over time. Maybe these guys shrink a little bit, and your defenders are maybe they weigh 150 pounds instead of 300 or 280 pounds in muscles. When you're older, maybe these guys shrink a little bit, and so any team can get by them regardless, because your non-specific is not that good. So what happens later? Well, here's Del Bigtree, by the way, and so if you have specific antibodies, now these guys are they've gotten the vaccine, so they're ready to look out for the star running back over here. I don't know if it's Adrian Peterson or LaDainian Tomlinson or somebody from the Lamar Jackson or whatever. If they can find and hunt out this guy, they're really good because they got the vaccine for the spike protein. They're going to find this guy's spike protein, and they'll be able to stop his play right at the line of scrimmage. So if this is the guy running the ball, you're all set. What happens over time, though, is that maybe I skipped the slide. Let's see if I can. So I apologize. I got to go backwards here. I guess there's one slide I skipped, which is that if they start giving the ball, you get your specific immunities. If they give the ball to X and you have a vaccine against X, everyone's been keyed in. Bill Belichick described what X does, and you're really good at finding X. But they put in some new players. He's got moves, or he's like what's his name? One of those tiny little running backs. You don't spot him that well. He's going to zip through the line. Maybe it's Kyler Murray or something like that. And he's going to zip through. You're not going to be able to find him because you're looking for X. Y gets through the line. So this is what's happened if you give vaccines to somebody who has good natural defense non-specific antibodies, potentially with kids. This is a point he's actually funneling and channeling Geert Vanden Bossche from I think he's from Belgium or the Netherlands, and his theory that you're actually going to make things worse by giving people with great natural immunity a specific vaccine. We don't know the answer to this yet; hasn't played out. But again, my general point for young people getting vaccine is, why would you fiddle with something that's so awesome? They have perfect immunity against coronavirus. Why are you playing around with this? Why are you tempting fate? Um, so his next slide, kind of shows a kind of a mix where you have, you've taken the vaccine and your non-specific antibodies are kind of diminished in role. They've shrunk a little bit, and you're relying on your specific antibodies. This is again Geert van der Bosch's premise. And so now even the spike protein guy, even if though you recognize him, he can find holes in the line because you're not your non-specific antibodies aren't as well, and of course anybody else who gets the ball as well. This slide I just put up. It's kind of the state of the art today. We have a store closed. Economically we're having a downturn. We're masked up though. Outdoors, this never makes any sense. There's no purpose ever to be masked outdoors. And again, if you're worried about your health and so forth, there are other ways in which you should be thinking, not just about your mask and so forth. There are other health aspects. I'm not going to really touch on them here. Maybe you can follow the point. We're going to go back in wisdom to Samuel Clemens, aka Mark Twain. It's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. I hope that's not the case with you, but who knows? As far as being fooled, the Lancet was fooled. This is from Majid Nawaz. He's an interesting guy, a former Islamist. He lives in England, and I think he's politically interested and active. Currently, I recommend you go take a look at his Twitter feed. This is called narrative collapse. The Lancet does a U-turn over the COVID lab leak theory. It's not so much that they did a U-turn, it's that they bought into the original narrative to begin with, and they promulgate it. This has been the same, true of the New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA. Across the board, these institutions, which we thought were scientific, have fallen to politics. So to get back to Einstein, what we're seeing is, not that politics is more complicated than physics, but I think that politics blots out physics, or in this case, general science. And people are blinded by political gain because we are human, we've got this ancient brain and all that kind of stuff. So, how it started, how it's going, I'm kind of switching themes here. He's knocking the door down with his syringe. Here is, kind of an NPC, if you're familiar with that. Getting his vaccine, happy and whatnot, following the narrative. Now it's like, you better get it. And I guess we're going to do some kind of political slides here. Voltaire, another pseudonym, I think his name was François-Marie Arouet, back from my French days. And he actually took his last name and made a, what do you call it when you mix the letters up, kind of an anagram. And he made the U into a V. And you can kind of see Arouet here if you're careful. And you mixed it all up. Anyway, to know who rules over you, simply find out whom you are not allowed to criticize. Alex Berenson found that out, and he got knocked off Twitter. There's a lot of this going around. When you, this is Frederick Douglass, find out what any people will quietly submit to, and you have the exact measure of the injustice and wrong which will be imposed on them. I'm going to let that kind of filter in. This is a similar type thing, probably apt for Frederick Douglass, who was obviously anti-slavery, 19th century. I think he was contemporary with Abraham Lincoln, a little bit after. So this is the crowd. We're seeing this in a lot of places, Australia and whatnot. If you stand up, you don't submit, you're alone. And everyone else is submitted, but you are a beacon. And at a certain point, others will follow you. They'll follow your example. And at another point, those who are tormenting you will give up. We've seen this, in the fall of the East Germany, the breakdown of the Berlin Wall, the fall of the Soviet Union, and so forth. Not so much, but through Solidarność, Solidarity, Lech Walesa. poll and whatnot. You need to, show your conscience, and you need to affect the change that you need. This one I haven't fully corroborated. I apologize, but you know, the concept here is the things that you're not allowed to think about. HIV is treated. It's a virus. It's deadly. It's a horrible virus. It's coronavirus pales in comparison to HIV, which is almost universally fatal. Frankly, it was until there was some treatment. There's still been no vaccine. Vaccine is not an issue. Treatment is the order of the day, and there are some effective treatments. There's nothing that cures it per se, but they're palliative, and they will treat you, basically keep you alive as long as you take the medication. Why that can't be the case with other viruses, why that can't be the case with coronavirus, I don't know. I mean, we've always heard there's no cure for the common cold, but there are cures for in a sense, for influenza, herpes, chickenpox, shingles. There are medications that work against viruses. There's no reason to think that there can't be one that doesn't, work against coronavirus. And ivermectin was looked at for viruses. And as I mentioned from my episode 2 weeks ago, it went into this more completely. So this is, I'm borrowing somebody else's slide here. You can, pause and look at this if you want on your own. But the point is that this is not necessarily a bad side to treatment. But if you mention it, you mention, any doubts about vaccine, boom, you're gone. This is a kind of a more dour meme. I'm sure he broke up with you because I'm ugly. Oh, don't say that. You're beautiful. He broke up with you because you called the cops on people minding their business at the park. Now, I don't know if this is a COVID cartoon or not, but it's certainly apt because that's what's happening in Australia. This is, the other direction. This is the police taking it out on somebody who finally, wanted to do this. So what's happened in Australia is that people have been beaten down. They can't go to the park. They can't, leave their house unless they have a good reason. They can't, barely walk their dogs and all this kind of stuff. And finally, people had enough. And in Melbourne, I believe it was, they had a massive, I think 5 mile long, kind of a personal convoy. And this person got kind of pulled from the herd, and she's a 74-year-old woman, and these brave officers are like having at her. So they're taking out their aggression. This is in some way going to help her not get COVID, I guess, down the road. Having pepper sprayed into her mouth and nose and eyes and so forth, all her mucosal membranes, which theoretically are the ones keeping you from getting viruses down the road. I don't know where to begin with this. Australia, we think of, they're an ally. We think of these as liberal democracies and constitutional republics and so forth. And England, UK, Australia, New Zealand, these places have gone on to hard times. And mind you, Australia has, I guess, what would be the kind of the George Bush version of a Republican. Either George Bush, doesn't matter which one. And I just imagine it would be worse if it were a leftist, but I'm not sure how much worse. New Zealand, I guess, has somebody on the left side of the aisle, and they're pretty much just as bad. They think the answer to this is not to build up any herd immunity, to go only vaccine route and then keep people out. I just don't get this one I pulled from the Wall Street Journal, which maybe along the line of George Bush is, theoretically right of center, but or maybe just center, but the reporters aren't, I don't think. And this is a standard issue with, the news. So that they put this out. Mark, I guess, sympathetic to Mr. Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg's vaccine plan was no match for Facebook. Ha ha ha. So it's his own Facebook, and he's sabotaged by his own Facebook. The CEO hoped to fight the pandemic with a wide-reaching public information push. Then anti-vaccine activists flooded the site using the platform's own tools to sow doubts. Now, what is wrong with that? I mean, if you have a good answer and your issue is science, I don't think you should ever be fearful of discussion. I think that the truth will out over time, and Mark Zuckerberg's made his fortune not by promulgating his own ideas. He's made his fortune by having a place where people can have free and open discussion and share, cat pictures and dog pictures and whatnot. This is, not my cat or dog picture. 75-degree, beautiful day, still summer at this time, and this guy, I assume he's, under 20 years old. based on his posture and appearance, such as I can see. He's got the umbrella. It's not raining. He's got the hat. It's not cold. He's got a windbreaker. There's no wind. He's well protected. He's got his glasses, earbuds, and mask. I don't know what to tell you. This is your future, and so here are just some kind of, I think, sort of clever memes, and I'm going to let you kind of click on them. It's the same theme. Hey, stupid, if you don't use your umbrella, mine won't work. This makes fun of Mr. Biden, unfortunately. The vaccine won't protect you, but get it or lose your job. And also the vaccine can spread the virus, so forth. This one I really liked. To protect, the protected need to be protected from the unprotected by forcing the unprotected to use the protection that didn't protect the protected. And I think we're coming to the end of my kind of meme hour here. Ours may be become the first civilization destroyed not by the power of our enemies, but by the ignorance of our teachers and the dangerous nonsense they are teaching our children. I don't think he was talking about COVID. This is Thomas Sowell. I recommend you go look him up if you're not familiar with him. He's, I think, one of the most brilliant guys around, brilliant economist. He writes sensible stuff in a clear way. I think he's hit 90 or so. He may not be with us that much longer, but follow him, read him, and so forth. But this is very, interesting advice. Yeah, and that does cover my kind of my meme show here. And I'm going to pull this down for now. See if I can change gears a little bit. So what else do we have? Well, there's just a couple things I'd like to go over that I found interesting in my path around the internet this week. And I'm going to maybe just kind of zip through them quickly, and you can decide if they're interesting to you as well. So this is somewhat akin to what I showed you with England. Israel reports sharp decline in Pfizer coronavirus vaccine efficacy. There are a couple things that can be happening. A, people are getting older over time. The older people who had it, they might still get sick or die from something else. It could be some drift because the Pfizer vaccine is an mRNA vaccine, refers to the ancestral version of coronavirus, and now we have a slightly new version. They could easily, frankly, make a new vaccine, but somehow this doesn't work in accord with finances and or kind of the lockstep bureaucracy. So there you have it. I mean, all they need to do is put a new mRNA recipe. They could get Delta spike protein instead and work against that over time. So the next one here is pediatricians remove info on mask risks and dangers for kids. I think this is in the UK. I'm not sure the AAP, which organization that is, but it's either England or here. And this is just bad news. I mean, why should you remove information such as this? This is where we get lockstep and kind of uni-party thinking. This has never worked out well for authoritarian, totalitarian regimes. I bring this up. This is have to do with Project Veritas. And this has just not been shown anywhere. This is, I don't think it's a great video. But it's an ER doctor who works for the U.S. Department of HHS, talking about kind of the problems with myocarditis with the COVID vaccine, which are real. They're measured in Israel. They're very, very slight, but they are more dangerous for young men, for instance, than the illness itself. So I just mentioned this because you can look into this. You might not have heard about it. This is Brazil, the Ministry of Health. It's bad translation of Portuguese, but basically they are they're not going to vaccinate adolescents, healthy adolescents anymore. The data is not good for them, for the healthy adolescents, and Brazil is actually taking the smart path. Their guy Bolsonaro gets made huge fun of. He was actually in New York City with the UN just a few days ago. And he was made to eat outdoors because he has not vaccinated. He has herd immunity. He had COVID. He got sick with it. He's all better. Um, and I assume he's president of the country. He's probably in his early 50s or something like that. And he was made to eat, on the street in New York City. And I assume they made a photo op out of it. De Blasio probably had a good time because he hates Trump, and Bolsonaro is the closest thing to Trump out in the political presidential world currently. Um, I just bring this one up. I like this guy. I found him out of the blue. I was looking at something else. He's got a page called lesswrong.com, easy to remember. Check it out. He's talking about how it is hard for humans with their slow processors to do anything except kind of think of what other people have thought of. And we work based on our memories and our experience and so forth. We can't ever process the way the computer or smartphone, presumably through which you're looking at this, can. So we think differently, and we pull up kind of basically like a deck of cards, kind of like flashcards with things that we already know and feel good about. And that's why people have a hard time kind of absorbing new information. I hope you feel good enough or well enough about this to help share this with other people. This one's a very, very complicated page. He goes on for probably, I don't know, this is probably a 20 or 30 page paper. I'm going to capsulize it for you. This is about Delta variant, whether Delta, he brings up the proposition, just looking at data science, whether Delta in fact is more transmissible. So we keep hearing that it's, twice as, or 3 or 4 or 5 times more transmissible than previous variants. I think that I've stated right from the beginning, that is bogus. It's the same size and shape coronavirus as all the other coronaviruses. The only thing that's happened differently is that there's a lot of pent-up demand for hugging and kissing and smooching and dancing. And so people have gotten a lot closer, and young people realize they don't really get the sick from this, and some of them might be vaccinated. It doesn't really matter. And they, the reason Delta is hopping from person to person more is because people are hopping, through and around and near each other more. And so there's more coronavirus because people are kind of like, it's summertime, the living is easy, they're doing more different things human basis. So anyway, he goes he really parses the data a lot, and I can't really go through the whole thing, but basically here's different regions of England, different locales and so forth. And this is the R factor, like what's the transmissibility, and it varies from place to place, time to time. Delta is not that different. This probably speaks more to human behavior differences in different places, different times. And overall, it is not that much different from all the other Delta strains. It's showing as maybe 30% more transmissible, but again, I think that's because the humans are doing more, different transmissible-like things themselves currently. So there you have it. I mean, you spend some time. I can send you the link if you're interested. This guy's Rex Chapman. He's a former. I remember him as a basketball player. Alex Berenson. He's this guy's very pro-mask and so forth, and I guess he got called out recently. I'll show you the next page, but I bring this up because Alex Berenson was my go-to guy on Twitter. I think he's wonderful, and I assume Ghost of Alex Berenson is the same guy. He had, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of followers, and Twitter cut him off the knees. So this is the Ghost of Alex Berenson. I reckon he seems to be the same guy covering the same stuff, but now instead of thousands of retweets, he's got 946 and so forth. You have to help build up Ghost of Alex Berenson. I assume Twitter will get rid of him too, but in the meantime, you can get some really excellent information. So he's the one who led me to the Rex Chapman thing, and I guess Rex Chapman. He was outraged. He's outraged by the COVID Bowl crowd at Virginia Tech. So I think he does social media stuff and sports, some kind of broadcast. He got a famous name. So professional offended guy, it seems to be his full-time job. Rex Chapman took to Twitter to voice his outrage at the COVID Bowl. So he's all incensed, again, about my sports thing. We've seen no spikes from these events. Oh my God, the COVID Bowl. Well, guess what? Here he is at the Phoenix Suns when, no mask, happy as can be. Everyone else is as well. Again, this is very much the same kind of thing we see from London Breed, from the Emmys, from all your politicians, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and whatnot. They do what they want on their own, and they think you're ignorant and you can't really figure out anything. Twitter bans, they call him conservative. I don't think he's a conservative at all. He just doesn't happen to buy into all the narratives such as they're given from up on high. Alex Berenson. So I had to, find this and validate. I guess I had missed it a few weeks ago. So this is, speaking to the partial title of tonight's episode. I'm going to be wrapping up soon. This is what's going to be happening with virus apartheid. Basically COVID apartheid. It's kind of presented that it's a bunch of Trump supporters that are the ones promoting vaccine skepticism and whatnot. But in fact, the largest anti-vax group ethnically in the country is Black African American people, and this showed up. These three women from Texas, as it were, showed up at Carmine's in New York City. I guess there were 9 people total, and they had to present a vaccine passport to get in. Now, the absurdity here is you present the vaccine passport to get in. There's no mask once you start eating. It's going to be hard to eat through a mask. And as we know, even vaccinated or not vaccinated, you theoretically can still be, transmitting the vaccine, although I think it's less so. So some member of the group didn't have the passport and they wanted to all eat together. And so a fight ensued. You can watch the video. One of these women started beating on the hostess, who happens to be Asian American. And as that, Asian hate crime, I have no idea. The whole thing's absurd. So, Mayor de Blasio has made this statute that you can't get into public establishments, private quasi-public establishments without a vaccine passport. Again, I'm not sure the fraction of the city that is Black, but the similar vaccine skepticism in Latino is not quite as high. And good luck with that. I think, New York City is probably, 40-45% Black, and, 65% of Blacks across the country, I'm not sure about New York City, are not vaccinated to date. So you're talking about, a few million people in New York City, being excluded based on their beliefs. These are some of the Einstein quotes I think you should check out. I'm not going to spend time on them here. Okay, I'm going to maybe kind of skim towards the end here, kind of go over the worldometer. I think you should do this on a regular basis, just see what's up. UK has Delta right now. There are high numbers of Delta variant. They're not really having anything in the way of deaths. This is, kind of my favorite phrase, a distinction without a difference. It doesn't really matter that you have Delta or Alpha or Beta or whatever, because you've pretty much cured the problem. There are always going to be some people dying, and that's that. I think there are 60 million people in the UK, and I forgot the number, of expected deaths. I think it's like, a couple thousand expected deaths in general on a regular basis in the UK, 3,000 or so, and that's just, par for the course. What are you going to do? This is not a problem that should be worried about henceforth and whatnot. So I'll just make one minor point. I guess Joe Biden put on a mask when he was talking with Boris Johnson the other day. Both of them had the illness. I assume both are vaccinated on top of it. And it just seems rude and impolite to have to do that. And it's all, show theater. Israel is having some more deaths, even though they're the most highly vaccinated country on earth. They're having cases, I believe this is Delta. This is not fractionated out by age group, but it's. I think I showed on a couple previous episodes. This is old people dying, not so much the young. You can go through this as well. This is the Delta variant. It's actually also the India strain, and I've shown this a number of times, just reinforcing. India had this Delta variant exclusively. That's all they had here in April and May. They had it. They had it disappear. And this was, at a time when the population was, less than 10% vaccinated, I think. So I'm going to probably stop there. I could go on more countries. I don't know if they're necessarily interesting. The United States, has very few deaths overall. Now there's cases. There's, some fatalities. But this is not so much in the places that have already had COVID. So if you look at the New York State, and Northeast states in general, you'll find that the the deaths are very, very low. So New York, the big place, I think there's 20 million people in New York State, and new deaths essentially zero. so you're not really looking at anything that matters. For the places that have substantially had illness already, you're not seeing very much. The places that are having deaths, well, guess what? Texas, with that open border, they're having 300 deaths. So, go figure. Some places that didn't really get affected early on in the South and whatnot are having some deaths, but again, not very many compared to the population. I'm not going to go over the expected deaths, but you can figure that out as well. So the United States is a big place. It's not that the entire country is having a spike. There's certain places that are having spike. I'm not going to go over the Israel data this week. So anyway, I think I'm going to call it on that. And what else? Maybe another question here. Why didn't college football cause spikes? Because, well, A, they're outdoors, so there's an infinite supply of air. B, people aren't that ill. People who are not sick with this don't really pass it along. The people, again, this is maybe 5 episodes ago, but I've shown it a couple different times. The so-called super spreaders, the people who really pass vaccine around, kind of harbor a lot of virions in their exhalation, are those who are sicker. And if I had to make a new name for it, it'd be if I could shorten away to, I suppose, bronchitis lingerers. The people who, when you get a cold, let's say you're a non-smoker, you're slender, and you're under 50 years old, so you don't get that sick from colds. When you get a cold, you have it a day and a half, or whatever. But your uncle or that guy who smokes, or he's overweight, or he tends to, my God, he gets a cold. He gets a cold for 5, 6, 7 days. Sometimes it's 2 weeks. Sometimes he gets pneumonia. Those people are your super spreaders. So those are the people who will get it and will more likely to get ill. They're the ones that have, poor kind of bronchial cilia mobility. That is, they don't move the mucus as well. So when they have an inflammation, an infection in their lungs, they don't clear the mucus and it kind of collects. They get secondary problems. They get breathing issues and so forth, plugging, asthma, and whatnot. Those are the people who have your basic mortality from something like coronavirus and or the flu. But other people don't. So the people who don't have that, they don't shed as much in the way of bacteria when they have pneumonias, and they don't shed as much when they have the flu or flu-like illness, coronavirus. And so most people who go to football games are up and around. They're reasonably healthy, and they're not that ill. A lot of them, as far as college games, they skew probably very young. There's some alumni there, whatever. The alumni are probably vaccinated. They're college educated and whatnot. And the young people don't need it. And they don't get that sick in the begin with. And going back to the earlier part of this, they have good natural kind of like barrier immunity against everything, non-specific, antibodies and good barriers. They're young, they're healthy. So this is kind of, again, mostly a problem amongst oldsters. We didn't really see any spikes after Sturgis bicycle rally either year, 2020 or 2021. Those guys are probably a little older than your college, football crowd. And they might be overweight and so forth, but even so, you don't get that much outdoors. It just doesn't do it. In order to really transmit from one person to the other, there has to be kind of aerosol, and the aerosol gets whisked away with the wind and outdoors. Anyway, I'm going to call it a night. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, let me know. If you didn't, let me know. Please share this widely. Ask your friends to do so as well. And if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And have a good evening. So I think that's going to do it for tonight. Stay well, and think about this problem and try to help your friends, get to a more logical conclusion.